ਸਾਰਿਆਂ ਨੂੰ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕਾ ਖਾਲਸਾ ਤੇ ਵਾਹਿਗੁਰੂ ਜੀ ਕੀ ਫਤਿਹ। ਸੰਗਤਾਂ ਜੁੜ ਗਈਆਂ ਨੇ ਤੇ ਬਹੁਤ ਵਧੀਆ। ਤੇ 4-5 ਸੰਗਤਾਂ ਦੇ ਮੈਂਬਰ ਇੱਧਰ ਆਪਣਾ ਲਾਈਵ ਸਟ੍ਰੀਮ ਤੇ ਵੀ ਜੁੜੇ ਹੋਏ ਨੇ। ਤੇ we'll run this space two ways. ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ space will also be open at the same time. We will run this space two ways. ਇੱਕ ਤਾਂ ਆਪਣਾ space will also be open ਤੇ ਦੂਜਾ ਆਪਣਾ there'll be a live stream which I'll also be doing simultaneously. So people are free to join the live stream or they can join the space. In the live stream, if you are only on the live stream, then you can ask questions by chat, but you cannot kind of join as a speaker. But if you join the Twitter space, then you can ask any questions when we get to the question answer time. You can ask questions in person and you can join the conversation. So that will be the case. ਇੱਕ ਦੋ ਜੇ ਕਿਸੇ ਸਪੀਕਰਾਂ ਨੇ ਆਉਣਾ ਆ, anybody who wants to be a co-host, ਮੈਂ ਦੇਖ ਰਿਹਾ I have not arranged for a co-host, but if there is somebody who can be a co-host, that'll be awesome. ਨਹੀਂ ਤਾਂ ਜਦ when Pieter will join, I'll probably give him the co-host. Pieter will join around he's running slightly late ਤੇ 10 ਮਿੰਟ ਤੋਂ ਲੇਟ 5 ਮਿੰਟ ਹੋਰ ਬਾਅਦ ਉਹ ਜੁਆਇਨ ਕਰੂਗਾ ਤੇ ਤਦ ਅਸੀਂ ਗੱਲਬਾਤ ਸਟਾਰਟ ਕਰਾਂਗੇ. Till the time we can do any other talk if anybody wants to take a speaker. Gajjan Singh ji bhi aaye ne, Stoic is there, Simran Mader is there, the Khalsa Patriot. Okay. Prohit ji, ਤੁਸੀਂ ਆਪ ਹੀ ਲੈ ਲਿਆ speaker. I didn't give you the speaker. Okay, it was just a bug. I'm happy to give you the speaker if you want. Yeah. So let's give a couple of more minutes for more people to join and Pieter to join. Yeah, so Pieter is here on my live stream. Pieter, you have to add your mic. And a couple of minutes, I will add him to the live stream here. Okay, he is here.
Hi, Harjeet. Brother, how are you?
I'm good, Pieter. How are you? So nice to hear your voice after long.
Yes, I'm doing well. It's been a while since we've had a chance to chat.
Okay, yeah. Let me just put a picture on your live stream. Let me find a
Perfect.
good picture for you. And there is one where you have stripped yourself in some hunger strike. You want that one?
It's up to you. That was one of my hunger strikes.
Yeah, let me find a good picture here. And while we are doing that, Pieter, what you can do is you can also, are you dialing from your cell phone or you are on the laptop?
I'm on the laptop.
Okay. If you have your cell phone, or even if you don't have your cell phone, even on the laptop, you can actually go to Twitter and dial into the space as well. So when you dial into the space, just make sure you have muted yourself up there. Even if you don't mute, I will mute you there. And
you mean like join the space and then
you can continue your live. You will keep speaking on live stream. You will also be visible in the space. What that will do is that more people will be able to see it on their timeline that you are in a space. So the space will get amplified on Twitter. But you'll have to mute yourself up there. Yeah. And you have to reduce the volume of that, space so that we don't get an echo in live stream. So your voice will basically come from live stream and it will go into the space because I have a setup. When you speak on live stream, your voice automatically gets transferred to the Twitter space as well. Oh, we can see you there. Awesome. Yeah. You might want to just mute your, reduce the volume of your.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I don't know how to do that if you are using the same setup, but that's yeah.
Let me just maybe turn off the Bluetooth so my headphones don't
Yeah.
accidentally switch over.
Okay. Yeah. Take your time,
There we go.
and we can
Yeah.
set this up. I got your picture here. Let me put up this handsome picture for you. And how do I add your picture here? Okay. There has to be a way to give you a face. Are you out there somewhere or?
Yeah, I'm out and about. Didn't have a chance. I wasn't expecting to do this on video, so otherwise I would be in my office.
Okay, okay, no worries, no worries. I'm trying to get you a picture. And okay, let's do that. Let's do both of them. Okay, great. No worries. I think while we are talking, I'll figure it out. But thank you, Peter, for joining. First of all, taking time out. I know we have busy lives, and but this is a very, very important topic and something that has been on my mind. For last almost 6 to 7 months. And before we start, many of my actually, viewers who listen to me, many of you know you, but many of you don't know you. And before we introduce the topic, and the topic is the title of your latest book, which is Saffron America, India's Hindu nationalist project at work in the United States. A provocative topic, but why don't you, Peter, just introduce yourself a bit for people who probably are listening to you first time. Tell us about you. How come an American, with a, I don't know whether it's a German sounding name, kind of became interested in, you're writing a book about Indian nationalists and the threat they pose, or Hindu nationalists and the threat they pose within US. So very unique. Seems to me like you have had a very unique life. Why don't you tell people about a bit about yourself? How did you become interested in India and what India is doing in US?
Sure, Harjeet. Well, my name is Peter Friedrich. I'm from the US. I'm born and raised in California. And I've been working on issues related to South Asia, but especially India, for about the past 17 years. This book that you mentioned is actually my fourth book. My first book, incidentally, was co-authored with a Sikh author, and it actually covers the origins and history of the Sikh movement and Sikh religion. That book has been translated into about half a dozen different languages from the subcontinent, including Punjabi and a number of others. And I got interested in South Asia about 17 years ago just by happening to meet people from South Asia, learning their stories, especially learning their stories of pain, of suffering in the recent past in modern history in India, and really having my heart moved by that. And then from there, continuing to, it's over the nearly 2 decades now, meeting an immense number of other people from all religions, all backgrounds from South Asia, but especially India, and kind of becoming embedded with the Indian diaspora communities, particularly in North America, but also in Europe, and working alongside them. Uh, Many, sometimes even actually living with Indian immigrant communities and families, and then continuing to learn their stories. And their stories, in many cases, unfortunately, tragically, oftentimes being of pain and of personal suffering. And then when Modi came to power in 2014, I was at the head of the BJP. As a product of this RSS paramilitary, the topic of Hindu nationalism for me, as somebody who had already spent quite a number of years focused on human rights issues in India, the topic of Hindu nationalism rose to the forefront as the most pressing human rights issue in India or in the South Asian region at that time and still currently to the present moment. And I kind of, from that time, began redirecting most of my energies to researching, writing about, talking about the issue of Hindu nationalism, um, especially its rise, its origins, its rise in India. But then also, as a born and bred American, it was of a great deal of concern to me when I began discovering ways in which the Hindu nationalist movement was both uh, in India, it was being supported by sympathizers and organized network from here in America. And then here in America, this organized network of Hindu nationalist sympathizers was also doing things in the sociopolitics of my country, um, especially at the political level, and propping up candidates for U.S. Congress, even candidates for the presidency, and candidates for state level offices, local offices, et cetera, and trying to get their foot in the doors of political power here in my country, while doing so as sympathizers of supremacist movement, which has its roots back in India.
Got it, got it. No, thank you for the detailed walkthrough. And before we start, I want readers to look at this is the book which we are going to talk about a lot, but this is not the only topic that we'll be talking about. It's available. I've been waiting for it. I think it took a long time for it to be available on Amazon. Um, and I'm going to. I have read a fair bit of it, not the full book as yet, because I just got it a couple of days back. But I can tell you, anybody who's in national security of US, they better read this book than some of the useless crap that these think tanks kind of pump out day in and day out. But that being said, Peter, I know you have other books you have written, and we'll talk a bit about those, especially the one that you wrote on Gandhi, and because that was the first book that I read from you. I also read your book that you wrote on the Gurdwara attacks in Afghanistan, which were probably engineered by the Indian agencies. I think Kite Flying was the name of that book. And but this, I think, in my terms, like this is probably your most critical work till now, because this is about United States of America, which I see as the last bastion of whatever human liberty we have left in the world today. So, with that being said, uh, why are you writing about Saffron America and Hindu nationalist project at work in United States? Why don't you kind of lay it out for our fellow patriots, like many of us who come from the Indian subcontinent? We know what this threat is about. We understand this threat, but do people who are born in US, like born Americans on the soil, do they really understand this? Can you just kind of, can you talk about why we are talking about this? This probably is not even the number one story on any mainstream newspaper, but probably the biggest. Is this a national security threat in your view?
Um, to one extent or another, and I won't fall on either side as far as declaring it a severe one or a minor one, but I will say that I am in full agreement that this is the sort of information, facts that members of the U.S. government, both electeds and those within civil service, especially like the Secretary or the Department of the Secretary of State or any of the security agencies, certainly need to be made aware of. Um, no, this is not national news in America, although the existence of and the problem of Hindu nationalism and the entities backing it has been national news in India, certainly, for a long time. And so, uh, kind of digging into that aspect of your question a little bit, the people here in America basically don't know about this. The people in India do, and that includes the people in America who are Indian origin, who are in the diaspora. So for a very long time, a major goal of my work has been to take what I've learned from my research and from the diaspora and to write about it journalistically, document it, and try and use it to educate the American populace, especially decision-making types, people in media, people in government, etc. Because there is that huge gap, that huge ignorance that is present there about this issue.
Yeah, no, no. And we will talk about it, the word, and I was reading through this book, and the word and we will talk about, I think I agree with most of your conclusions and diagnosis. There are some places where I probably slightly disagree, and we probably have a good, I would say, conversation there. Hopefully, that makes conversation for people. Um, so you use the word Hindu nationalist project, right? What is Hindu nationalism? Can you educate our, fellow patriots, and why should we worry about it?
Yeah, Hindu nationalism is kind of what it sounds like. It's basically the Hindu equivalent of Christian nationalism or of Jewish nationalism or Islamic nationalism. Any you take religion, you tie in religion with a nationalistic movement, and you have religious nationalism where you're attempting to guide the country along lines that match up with that particular movement's idea of their religion. You attempt to, in essence, turn the country in a more or less a theocratic direction, and make religion the basis for the nation. In context of Hindu nationalism, um, Hindu nationalism as an ideology that's been an articulated ideology has been around for 100 to probably 150 plus years, maybe 200, but especially about 100 years since the first book, which explicitly detailed the ideology as a religious nationalist political ideology, was published in 1923. And basically, it takes the view that India is a country of Hindus, always has been a country of Hindus, always must be a country of Hindus, and a country of, for, and only for Hindus. It's very similar to the Zionist project and its approach to Israel, where views Israel as being a land basically exclusively for Jewish people. And within context of Hindu nationalism, or as it's oftentimes termed, Hindutva, the idea is that anybody who lives within India must be a Hindu, and if they're not a Hindu, then they must variously live in basically a subjugated second-class citizenship status, where they, as a non-Hindu, agree to praise and glorify and live according to the ethos of the particular view of Hinduism, which is held by these Hindu nationalists, which is and I emphasize, it is a particular homogenized view of Hinduism that they hold, which is differing from that held by many others. And then either that, or anybody who is in India who is not a Hindu, if they're not going to be second-class citizen who's subjugated, then they need to maybe even be eliminated or exterminated, driven out of the country.
Yeah, no, that's great. I will also, that's a great setup. And as people join, as I said, I want this space to kind of educate a bit more my fellow patriots. I'm going to take 2 minutes, Patrick, and
Please.
show on my screen the political map of India when British left and what it is today. And when we use the term Hindu nationalism, like what does it mean in terms of geographically, and who is kind of talking about it. So I'll take 2 minutes just to set that context up for people. I'm going to share my screen here, and people in the space might not be able to see, but if you are watching my timeline, you'll see that map there. So this is for people who are new to subcontinent or what's going on there. This is the map of when British of Indian continent, Indian subcontinent. We call it. India is not a name. India today is denoted as a country, but in reality, it is a subcontinent with more than probably 30 to 35 different nations which are within it. So this is the political map. If you are on the live stream that you see, this is, you had multiple nations like Baluchistan, Punjab, Rajasthan, Rajputana used to call it, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu. Many of these nations far bigger than, in size as well as population than the great nations of European continent. Some of these are bigger and have more population than even, Germany, for example, or France, and very distinct and different from each other. The amount of they say, like, the amount of genetic diversity between one village in or one district of India is way higher than what you find in entire European subcontinent. So all these nations, they are primarily divided by language. You will find mix of different religions within them, but their primary differentiation is language. So Punjab, people primarily speak Punjabi. So this is what British kind of conquered and made it into one unit. And when they left, what they did was they basically divided into two major, what I call mini empires. One is Pakistan, the other is India. So this is what you see, the political map that you see of India today. And the states, they basically started calling all these nation states rather than nations. So Punjab was having a major Muslim population. A portion of Punjab with majority Muslim was given to Pakistan, and then majorly Sikh and Hindu was given to India. And then you see all these different states; they are kind of nations in themselves. All, as I said, divided along, or marked along language. For example, I come from this northern state called Punjab. I don't even understand, an iota of a word that a Tamil person can speak. We are ethnically, religiously very different. So it's a very diverse subcontinent which is controlled through a very powerful centralized setup in Delhi. So what are Hindu nationalists? As Peter was pointing out, these are the group of people who are claiming that this entire subcontinent, including Pakistan, is one nation. They reject the idea that India is a federation of multiple nations. They say it is one nation, and which nation? They claim it is Hindu civilizational nation. So they say, yeah, you could be having different beliefs and different, ethnicities, but at the core, we are Hindu. And that is what brings them very close to, the philosophy that Hitler was proposing. Hitler was, propagating. And I know, Peter, you have written a lot on it, and I want you to kind of now draw the parallel between Hindu nationalism and Nazism or fascism. And I'll hand it over to you. Like Hitler said, we need political unity because we are racially similar. Uh, Indian nationalists or Hindu nationalists, for me, they are one and the same, but we'll ask Peter if he considers them the same. They are saying we need unity because we are civilizationally similar, not like racially similar. So for them, most of the Indian or Hindu nationalists like fascism and Nazis were their role model. With that, Peter, you want to kind of talk about, what are the similarities between, Nazism and Hindu nationalism?
Sure. And as you mentioned it, I would say for myself, I would draw a contrast between Hindu nationalism and Indian nationalism. I don't endorse religious nationalism of any kind, but I am also opposed to nationalism, period, which tends to have this kind of supremacist view of the nation or this centralizing vision, or generally leans, from everything I've seen in history, towards authoritarianism, and towards kind of a puffing up of the chest about one's own nation. And it's never turned out good for anybody. But I have seen plenty of nationalistic movements which don't have a religious nationalist element to them. And from that, at least I would differentiate those. Now, when it comes to Nazi Germany, the Nazi movement, and the Hindu nationalist movement, there's plenty I could get into there, Harjeet. But one of the initial things that comes to my mind since you pulled up this map of the original subcontinent is that the Hindu nationalist movement has this uh, vision of territorial reclamation, which is very similar to the ideas that were held by the Nazis. For anybody who's a little bit of a student of history, you may remember that the Nazis didn't begin by invading France or invading Russia or that sort of thing. They began by annexing areas like Austria, the Sudetenland, which, if I'm not mistaken, lays in part of what is now the Czech Republic, and other areas around them, directly around them, which were historically German-speaking countries, and which the Nazis maintained should be reabsorbed into a greater Germany and returned as properly belonging to Germany because they used to be part of it. And similarly, the Hindu nationalist movement has these territorial ambitions of reclaiming, for instance, Pakistan, um, reclaiming Nepal, but depending on which Hindu nationalist you're asking, and tracing back to in the 1920s and 1930s, the original Hindu nationalist ideologues who first articulated this concept in the modern age, the areas which they claim as being part of a former Hindu civilizational nation, which properly belonged to the Hindu nation, which would be ruled by India, or as they term it, Bharat, Bharat, which is their preferred, more mythological Hindu term for India. The areas they claim stretch all the way from Afghanistan through Pakistan, Nepal, across to Bangladesh, and maybe even as far as Myanmar, maybe even on to Indonesia. I mean, it's a vast, vast stretch, but it's certainly, they at minimum generally lay claim to the entirety of South Asia. And sorry if anybody from Sri Lanka is listening, don't let me forget you. The Hindu nationalist movement also lays claim in general to Sri Lanka. Um,
if news to you, they also like claim to Europe, but we'll come to that later.
yeah, we could get into that. So as far as that being one parallel in terms of their ideology, ideologically, when one parses through the manifestos written by Hitler, for instance, Mein Kampf, and the manifestos written by the original Hindu nationalist ideologues, there's just a lot of mirrored fascistic ideology in terms of things that they believe about how the nation is our motherland slash fatherland. The nation is to be deified. The highest sacrifice and the highest aspiration for any citizen of the nation is to sacrifice their lives for the nation. Um, in terms of this need for military regeneration, in terms of this need to return to restore a mythic lost golden age from the past, in terms, as I mentioned, of territorial ambitions, and so on, in terms of the idea that the appropriate thing for a citizenry to model itself after is uniformity and conformity to each and everyone else. That individualism or being unique is almost like a vice, and it's anti-national to not be uniformed and conformed to everybody else in the country, and all walking in lockstep. A lot of other similar paralleled ideological ideas between Hindu nationalism and fascism, which were both being articulated basically contemporaneous to each other in the 1920s and 1930s. And so the contemporaneous aspect is important for other reasons as well, which is not just that you see as these ideologies are being pretty much simultaneously articulated, one in Europe and one in the subcontinent, but also that as the movements are rising and originating, rising, and gaining power, that especially India, but also Europe to an extent, they're looking at each other. And in India, with the Hindu nationalist movement, or in the Indian subcontinent at the time, with the Hindu nationalist movement, the Hindu nationalist ideologues were looking at Germany and also at fascist Italy, and identifying particular aspects of those movements as things that they admired, that they wanted to emulate, and also that they believed justified their ambitions. So, for instance, one of these major ideologues in the 1930s was looking over at Nazi Germany and fascist Italy and saying that their territorial ambitions and their rising racial consciousness or race spirit and other aspects basically proved the rightness of a similar movement that he wanted to develop in India, in the subcontinent, through the Hindu nationalist movement. He was also looking at violence that was being perpetrated and calling out, for instance, from the Hindu nationalist movement, identifying the expulsion, the discrimination against and expulsion of German Jews, and saying that because Germany was doing that, that basically it proved the impossibility of having a multicultural society, and that therefore it should be a lesson to be emulated for how to treat minorities in India. Similarly, pointing at Indian Christians or Christians in the subcontinent and Muslims in the subcontinent, and then looking over at the fascists in Europe, and basically saying that what they're doing to them over there, that's how we want to treat them over here, and because they're doing it over there, it also justifies our desire to treat them that way over here in the subcontinent, because once again, they're proving that unless you're going to integrate into society and assimilate in then you don't deserve to live here. And you only deserve to live here as a second-class citizen at most, at most. And when they were using terms like integrate and assimilate, or synonyms of those which they used, their concept of that was basically that, like, as I talked about this idea of uniformity and conformity, that in order for somebody to be considered integrated and assimilated into the nation, into society, they had to abandon everything that makes them unique and different and separate, and adopt all the trappings and all the ethos of one particular social community, for instance. A lot of other aspects, I mean, down to even co-founder of this RSS, which is RSS paramilitary, which is the oldest currently dominant Hindu nationalist movement in India today, and which was originating in the 1920s and 30s. One of the co-founders, excuse me, even traveled to Mussolini's Italy, met Mussolini, toured Mussolini's fascist organizations, his youth organizations, his black shirts, and so on, and then came back and very explicitly said that the goal of the RSS should be the military regeneration of the Hindu race, and that they should look over to what they have over in Italy and treat that as a model to emulate. And then basically he did basically, however, conclude that yes, we do want to model the fascist organizations over in Italy, We do want, we do need this military regeneration of Hindus as our goal, and this kind of centralization. But the good news is we're already doing it. We've already got it in context of this RSS organization.
Got it. Got it. Yeah. Just for the no, this is well laid out, the links that they have and the affinity they have with fascism and Nazism. But for the audience, we're going to continue with the format today will be like we'll continue. I'll just interview Peter for maybe how 30 more minutes, and then depending, we'll open it up for question. I think Peter, how much time we have with you today? 2 hours is good
Oh,
enough.
I could probably do maybe 30-ish minutes of questions once we, yeah,
Got it.
hour and a
Then
half or so. Yeah.
awesome, awesome, got it. Yeah, then we'll open it up for questions. So I know because there are some hands raised. So yeah, like, I know like you and we'll come back to this later. This is where Peter and I kind of slightly, I would say, are not at odds, but we'll say we have different take. Like he sees a difference between Hindu nationalism and Indian nationalism, and I primarily call them two sides of the same coin. One is more overt, another is more covert, but we'll basically talk about it, at later part when we go into questions. But Peter, like I was reading your book, like, and you have many examples here of Hindu nationalists trying to, gain influence, or they already have probably gained influence within United States. You have examples of senators, congressmen who are being, funded, influence. There are, certain names that I see here is Raja Krishnamurti, his links with Hindu organization. There is Atul Kashyap, the ambassador we had, Sonal Shah. We talk about, there is that Hawaiian congresswoman, I forgot her, Tulsi Gabbard, Neeraj Antani. What is your take? Like, why are these Hindutva nationalists trying to infiltrate US? What is their aim? And then, if you can talk a bit more with maybe even some examples how they are doing it, that'll be great. Like why they are doing it and how they are doing it. I think that'll be great.
Sure. The why, well, one of the basic whys tracing back to 2014 and a couple of years before that was they wanted and kind of needed to influence the American politics in order to whitewash Modi's track record here in the US and influence US foreign policy towards an India, which was soon to be controlled and ended up being controlled by Modi. And Tulsi Gabbard, the former congresswoman from Hawaii, is the chief example of that. For those who don't know, Modi was the chief minister of the western state, Indian state of Gujarat. And shortly after he became chief minister in 2002, there was a pogrom, basically, committed against Muslims in Gujarat. Ran for the heat of it ran for about 3 days, left about 2,000 Muslims dead. And the perpetrators, according to basically every international source and basically every Indian human rights source, were members of Hindu nationalist entities, including of the BJP, Modi's political party, which is part of this family of Hindu nationalist entities, which is part of the Hindu nationalist network. As a consequence of that, couple of years later, when some of the sympathizers of the Hindu nationalist movement here in America wanted to invite Modi to America for a speech, human rights activists in this country got wind of that and began advocating, lobbying the U.S. government, and successfully got Modi's visa denied and got basically a ban on Modi's entry to the U.S., which lasted from 2005 until 2014. Now, when Modi was elected prime minister in 2014, it's notable that this ban on his entry to the U.S. Was never actually rescinded. It wasn't lifted. It was just circumvented by virtue of the fact that Modi had become prime minister. He had essentially diplomatic immunity, and the U.S. didn't want to make a massive international scene by continuing to deny him entry. So when Modi was trying to become prime minister, and it was pretty apparent from about, I think, 2012 onwards at least, that he was going to be the BJP's candidate for prime minister, there were a couple of things that happened here in America. One is that this network of Hindu nationalist entities and sympathizers in America began mobilizing and organizing in America to work to help get Modi elected as prime minister in India, doing all kinds of things I could go into. It's in my book, running phone banks, massive phone banks from calling from America to India, sending 2,000-3,000 people back to India from America to actually campaign for Modi's election, and so on. But one of the other things that they did was they also began, from my perspective, pretty obviously, seemed to be grooming politicians that they thought would be able to help them out with Modi, who was then banned from America, and help to begin bringing him back in from the cold, if you will, and softening up his image once more here in the U.S. And they started in Illinois, I believe in 2010 or 2011, maybe around then, with one particular Republican congressman who was actually from the Tea Party. And this guy he went to India, with a couple of other members of Congress, he met Modi. He did a photo ops with Modi and kind of like broke the ice as far as being one of the first few American politicians since the massacre of 2002 and since Modi's ban to be willing to actually meet Modi and kind of shake his hand. But then that guy was a lost cause for them. He got voted out of office within one term. So then they shifted from the Republican to the Democrat Party, and they found Tulsi Gabbard, who was probably a better pick for them as somebody who had converted to Hinduism, somebody who young, charismatic woman, and they began heavily funding her campaign. And she did go on to win. I believe she took office in January 2012 for the first time in U.S. Congress. But from even before she took office, these leaders and these members of these internationalist groups around the U.S. And other associates of theirs were successful in getting Tulsi Gabbard to begin to appear at events that in America that were overtly Hindu nationalist events, branded with the branding of these Hindu nationalist entities. They began to secure from her commitments about her approach towards India, and basically secure her promise of essentially an unconditionally friendly foreign policy towards India. And then once she got elected, within about a year and a half or less, Modi got elected. And she became one of the first people to meet Modi. And then very quickly within the first few months of Modi getting elected, she became one of the first people to travel to India and meet Modi there in India, which she then proceeded to do several times. And so as Modi he'd been banned from the country for a decade with accusations of him being involved in a massacre of religious minorities and Muslims. And it was a big deal for him to get immediately after he was elected, all of a sudden get this embrace from these charismatic, articulate people in U.S. Congress like Tulsi Gabbard, who, as this was happening, went on to very quickly, within, I believe, her first term in Congress, and I believe within a year of meeting Modi or close to around the same time, ended up rising to become the second most powerful person in the Democratic National Committee. So not only was Modi getting this embrace from these American politicians, both in America and then in India, but he was getting it shortly after by somebody who'd risen to be the second person in basically in the Democratic Party. This person, however, happened to be somebody who was at the time receiving massive amounts of funding, according to my research, variously depending on the year, anywhere from 20 to 25% of her total campaign funding from Hindu nationalist sympathizers who are leaders and members in these Hindu nationalist entities. And as she was doing this, she continued to then kind of begin what I would argue was a fairly calculated and intentional project of normalizing and legitimizing not just Modi, but also Hindu nationalism. Speaking at RSS events in India, speaking at events of organizations tied to the RSS here in America, and so on and so forth. And then even going on to, at a later point, even actually specifically naming Hindu nationalism and defending it as a legitimate ideology.
Yeah, yeah. They now want us to accept openly, the idea of a fascist in India. So,
Yeah.
yeah, with that,
And so I mean, just briefly with Tulsi Gabbard, then of course, with this background of her rise to U.S. Congress being so heavily funded by Hindu national sympathizers and everything she did for Modi, she then went on to run for the presidency and so try and get into the highest office in America. And I would argue that as far as the why, um, that has been originally the primary reason that most of these international sympathizers are seeking out um, political candidates is to use them and their influence to get into the highest offices possible so as to one attempt to guide U.S. policy towards India in a direction that is soft on a Modi-ruled India, where human rights are being trampled on increasingly, and then two, provide the funders, the donors, the international sympathizers here in America with increased levels of political access in America through the candidates that they've helped to prop up.
yeah, no, with yeah, we'll come to that, and yeah, it's not just Tulsi. My research shows almost majority of senators election today in US hinges upon the Indian American vote. And most of the Indian Americans today, especially of nationalist kind, are influenced and controlled by RSS and Modi is extremely popular, so they vote as a vote bank. Just doing in your book, you have done some numbers. I think they're understated. I think you took the name like maybe there's 700,000 Indian origin people, but when I was googling, the number comes to around 4.9 million. If that number is true, let us say there are 5 million people of Indian origin, it's safe to assume 80% of them are of Hindus. So, or maybe let's say 60% are Hindus. So we're talking about almost 3 million people who could be Hindu nationalists. I would say maybe 70% of them today are, and they're mostly upper caste. Very few people are lower caste. Let's say 60 to 70% of them are, influenced by this ideology. We are talking about 2.3 million vote bank. Yeah. Hold on, Pari, hold on. Please, like, I'll just respect audience not to speak when without I kind of raising your hand. I'll give you the questions. So Peter, we are talking about 2.3 million vote bank, and there is a reason when a vote bank which can vote, en masse based upon where Modi will tell them to vote. Uh, there is a reason when Modi came to US, he did the Howdy Modi event where he invited Trump, and it was a sad day for me because I'm a libertarian. I'm more sympathetic to conservatives. He invited Trump to a stadium, and I can bet that stadium had minimum 60,000 Indians waving, Indian flags. I can bet my experience if, the Prime Minister of Britain does this act, where he goes to a stadium with 60,000 people of British origin waving British flag, and he saying, "Hey, Trump, I am going to make you win the election." We our national security establishment would be alarmed. But here is Modi, and he got away with it. I'm surprised how that happened, and it's kind of a, I call it a the gravest national security threat that is facing United States. Canada recently came out with a report of foreign interference, and in which they name India as the second gravest threat after China. And I think they call it second just out of the fact that China has to be number one because China is the number one competitor. But the fact is, in terms of foreign interference in today in Canada, India is the number one player, and India is inching towards that same, I would say, status in US. Their next target is US, unless we do something, unless we wake up and do something. With that, I'll just probably start taking questions for Peter. Uh,
Well, I would just say, Harjeet, again, I don't know if I would name it as India's the gravest national security threat, but what I do know, based off of what you just mentioned, and the reportage from Canada about their consideration on India, and the threat it faces, what I do know is that with the targeting of Niger, and then successful targeting and assassination of Niger, and then the targeting of Panun last year, which was unsuccessful, that we have not seen, that I'm aware of, any country in modern history, at least, attempt to assassinate on American soil an American citizen. Now, we have seen incidents like Jamal Khashoggi, the journalist who was murdered in Saudi Arabia. But as I recall, that was not that it was certainly not to excuse it in any way whatsoever, but he was murdered in Saudi Arabia, or excuse me, in Istanbul, in Turkey. And he was a U.S. citizen, but he was murdered outside of the U.S.
he
So
was he
for
was he was not even a U.S. citizen. He was a permanent resident, but yeah, very close to that. But yeah,
ah yeah, well, and in that case, so I mean, for us to have gotten to the point where there is any country in the world that feels emboldened, and feels it has the potential impunity to attempt to murder one of our own citizens in our own country, that certainly is something that I don't know if I would categorize it as far as the level of first, second, third, or greatest threat. But that certainly is a major national security threat, which our government cannot afford to ignore.
yeah. I think the key is how did this third world country get that confidence to do it? I think the answer lies there. And the key will be, Peter, will they get away with it? If they get away with it, I think then the level of this threat goes up multifold. And we'll talk about that. But I would like to start taking some questions now. I know a couple of people had their hands raised. The way we will do it is I will take questions and I will start, once you ask your question, maybe a rebuttal or two, depending upon how the question goes. I will then, take your speaker to give the speaker to next speaker. For some reason today, everybody got the speaker. It seems like there is some new feature in Twitter. People can automatically get speaker, or there is some setting I did not set up, but that's fine. But please don't mind. Once you have asked your question, I'll be taking the speaker away so that I can get in the next speaker. And people who are in the listener, if you want to ask questions, please start asking for the speaker so that you queue up. And then I'll keep a track record of who has raised his hand first, so that we have some kind of a general order. I know that I remember Bayram Khan had his hand raised first. So Mr. Bayram, please go ahead and ask your question, then we'll go to Joe.
I'm afraid I can't hear anything.
Is the average white American aware of the threats from this organization and the political interference in the United States? If yes, to what extent are they aware? If no, then is anybody taking up the responsibility of making them aware? Because I still believe the white American has a lot more power in the American politics as of now than the minority of Indians.
Okay.
Thank you, Peter.
Okay, just hold on a bit. I think Peter just dropped from the live stream. Peter, are you planning to stay on the space and drop from the live stream? I don't know what your plan is. I think he just dropped. Oh, he's come back. Okay,
Yeah,
got it.
apologies for that. I'm here. Something happened with my earphones.
Okay,
I did catch last 15 seconds, 20 seconds of the question.
okay, that's fine. We are going to try it again. I'm sorry about that. I think it was my mistake. I had kept my system on mute. That is why you are not able to listen to the question initially. And Baram Khanji, I'm so sorry, but you'll have to repeat your question again. I think we got Peter back. If you can make it quick, and then so that he can start. Yeah.
Okay, but Peter, I just want to make sure that are you able to hear me this time?
Yeah, I can hear you. You're a little tinny, but I can hear you.
Great. So, Peter, my question was, is the average white American aware of the threat that this organization is posing them directly? And if yes, to what extent are they aware? If no, then who's taking the responsibility of making them aware of this political interference that's happening in the United States because of this organization? Thank you, Peter.
Sure. Well, I guess 2 points. As far as for myself, that's kind of a very central core aspect of my work is trying to make people aware. I mean, that's why I put out my book, Saffron America, is because there is basically no currently existing literature like that. It's the first time in the publication of my book that there's any book at all about Hindutva influence in the U.S. There are, besides myself, a number of other journalists who do work on these issues pretty routinely. I happen to be, I believe, the only non-Indian, non-South Asian in America who does this pretty much as a full focus. Most of the other journalists are doing good work, but most of the other journalists who do this are South Asian origin. And I collaborate with many of them as frequently as possible, but unfortunately, there's not really anybody outside of the Indian community or South Asian community, other than myself, that I'm aware of, that's really doing this full time. Then, second, no, the average white or non-white American in the U.S. basically has no conception of this. I have begun to anecdotally encounter in process of meeting people, a larger number of people who have at least some kind of basic awareness of, oh, Modi's bad, or who know that Hindu nationalism exists and that it's kind of dominating in India. But almost nobody that I meet in that aspect is like meeting in the process of just living in my anecdotal experience has any conception of Hindu nationalist influence in the U.S. However, that's the average American, white or non-white. But I would say in my experience, both personal and shared to me by others, when it comes to the government, especially the federal government, most of the people there do have some knowledge. Most of the people there, and I'm talking both electeds and civil service, people in intelligence agencies or the State Department or something like that. Most of them do know pretty in depth already about, even about the RSS, about internationalism, about Modi, about the violence, as well as about aspects of the presence of internationalism and its interference in America. The problem with that is that, generally speaking, in order for their knowledge to lead to any kind of a policy change, the policy change is going to have to come from the electeds. And so a lot of the people who are the non-electeds, who are in civil service, they are very sympathetic, but they can't force policy change. That has to come through the electeds. And the electeds are subject to running for re-election, worrying about their campaigns, worrying about their campaign financing, worrying about bad publicity and being accused of being a Hindu phobe if they call it internationalism, and that sort of thing, as well as they're also subject to the general atmosphere in the federal government today regarding the geopolitical agenda that they want to pursue, which is to continue, as I mentioned before on Spaces with Harjeet, to continue pursuing this idea that India can be, should be, and can be used as a bulwark in the vast plan to box in China and China's international global influence. And so from that perspective, no, the average American doesn't really know, although increasingly many of them are getting to know. And especially within my experience, a lot of, I mean, you mentioned white Americans, but I would keep hammering home that non-white American aspect. A lot of the audiences that I've spoken to, especially of Muslims, that consist of non-South Asian Muslims, they're already keenly aware of the existence of this problem. A lot of activists, especially on issues like Palestine, the genocide in Gaza, they're keenly aware. I just came from an event last week that was talking about the India-Israel relationship and the relationship between Hindu nationalism and Zionism, and it was a very, very large, very mixed audience of very activist type people. And those kinds of crowds, they tend to know. But the people who really need to know at the top, especially in the federal government, my experience is most of them already know, although they could definitely stand to learn more about the Hindu nationalist influence in America. But their hands are tied at the civil service level because the electeds are refusing to take any kind of action.
Yeah, that's great. I think you brought up a very great point, which was always there. Like, they have come up with this new sinister strategy, which is called to put you on the defensive by saying, "Hey, you are just being a Hindu phobe if you question anything on caste or discrimination or Hindu nationalism." That's why I see, and we'll come back to this. I don't want to kind of rebut you on this, but like it's like I think that's where probably we people who are fighting it need to change the strategy. We should call it what it is. It is basically Indian nationalism. And the moment you go to Hindu nationalism, you basically allow them to come back with this, fake narrative of Hindu phobia. But the reality is that there is no difference between somebody saying all of Indian subcontinent is one civilization and somebody saying all of Indians are Hindus. It is one and the same thing. And with that said, we'll move to the next question. Joe actually was there waiting for such a long period of time. She dropped again. Joe, I'm going to send you a speaker again because you've been waiting patiently. I see you are back. If you don't get the speaker, that's fine. While we wait for Joe, we can take the next speaker, which is Kira. Kira Kandedar. Yeah, please go ahead, Kira.
Thank you, Ruji. My question to Pieter, do you believe that Congress and BJP or RSS is having the same DNA? If hypothetically, if Gandhi family won this time election, do you think there would be a change in United States or worldwide? Whatever RSS is doing or Vishwa Hindu Parishad is doing, uh, uh, manipulating brains and infiltrating into the government offices, doesn't matter, regardless of United States, everywhere they doing it. So would you see any change, or you think it's the same DNA and they go along, doesn't matter who comes there?
Sure, and just to clarify, change, are you referring to change in India or change in the US or both?
For both. For India first, then the US.
Yeah, flatly, I would say no, they don't share the same DNA. They do both have blood on their hands. But I would say that the Hindu nationalist movement, the RSS BJP, it's a different animal. One of the main differences that I perceive is that they have a pretty explicitly articulated, detailed ideological foundation, which is overtly fascistic. Congress doesn't have that, and agree or disagree with their politics, which have always tended to be pretty socialistic. The things that they've articulated for India, at least that they say they want to do for India, or that they, many of the things that they have done for India, have not been bent on, as we see now today with these Hindu nationalist demagogues around the country, bent on calling for, like outrightly, explicitly calling for committing genocide against minorities on a routine basis. That said, I just spoke recently about the 1984 Sikh genocide, and certainly I completely agree with the conclusions of many people, including the entity I quoted, which is the excuse me, the U.S. Commission on International Religious Freedom, that by granting impunity to the perpetrators of the 1984 Sikh genocide, that laid the groundwork for impunity. It laid the groundwork for impunity and a precedent for impunity for the RSS BJP when they later in the 90s, the 2000s and onwards began committing massacres of Christians and of Muslims. And that if impunity had not been granted to Congress in '84, that it's possible, we don't know what could have been, but we can speculate. Speculating, I think there's a very strong possibility that the RSS BJP would not have gotten away with the atrocities that it did get away with later on. And then further, of course, there's all kinds of aspects we can dig into about this, as far as various laws. Don't ask me to name them. I'm not good at remembering all of these things offhand, but various anti-terror laws and draconian laws. I think AFSPA may be one of them. I'm pretty sure it's one of them, which have been either passed or imposed by Congress. The emergency in the 1970s, when Congress basically imposed a de facto dictatorship over the country for 2 years. Many other things that Congress has done, which BJP is also now today doing, and I would argue in some ways maybe doing on either a larger scale or more open scale, especially in the social media and information age that we have, where everybody in the world knows it's happening, versus what Congress was doing. But whether that's true or not, Congress was doing the same types of things in the past, as far as extrajudicial executions, arbitrary arrests, holding people without trial or charges, shutting down newspapers and arresting journalists, et cetera, et cetera. So, this has been a problem in terms of Indian governance for decades. But as far as sharing DNA, I don't agree with that. I do think that if Congress were to return, that it wouldn't fix everything in India. Now, one reason it wouldn't fix everything in India is because over the past decade of BJP rule, there has been a huge change in the social climate and the underlying social ethos, which wasn't quite there before. So that, and this is this.
I would just, sorry to interrupt you, Peter. I think that's great. I think I want to add a dimension to this, right? Because we people like us were born there. You are right that the DNA might not be identical. Okay, that does not matter. What matters is it does not matter which national party is in power in Delhi, whether it is BJP or Congress. If you are a national party in India and you want to come in power in Delhi single-handedly, then you have to create an enemy and create fear in the mind of majority, because you need the vote of the majority, quote unquote Hindu majority. So Congress made an enemy out of six. And in the time of Congress, they basically, six were labeled as terrorists and they faced persecution for almost 2 decades. What BJP is doing is they made an enemy out of Muslims and Christians. That is the only difference. In terms of scale, if you just go by numbers of people, minority who were persecuted, Congress will far outweigh BJP. And that's more a function of that Congress was more in power in years, number of years, like, as a single party than BJP. The only time when minorities have not faced persecution in India is when in the center there were party coalition governments where regional parties were in power. Otherwise, whenever, irrespective of the national party in power, it is perforce their compulsion to persecute one minority and make it a million to kind of win elections. Now, you talked about laws that Congress passed, draconian laws, and BJP has passed draconian laws. But the question is that the Constitution allows them to pass the laws. Anybody, if I have the power to pass the law, I will pass the law because that is what I'm elected to do. But the question is, how come they have the power? So the problem goes back to the Constitution of India. The Constitution of India was single-handedly written illegitimately by Congress, and so the blame has to fall on their door, because the Constitution of India gives this tyrannical power to the quote unquote federal or central government to basically where there are no fundamental rights for people. If you read the Constitution of India, there is no fundamental right a human being has, a citizen has. The state can take it away anytime. It is like, it is like it's not like American Constitution or the other constitutions we see in Canada, where you have your charter. The Indian Constitution has nothing. So don't you think that Congress should take a blame for writing such a constitution?
Well, I don't know if Congress should take the blame for it, and certainly I do know that traditionally Dr. B.R. Ambedkar has been championed as the author of the Constitution. But one thing I will say about it, Harjeet, is that I do agree that there are a number of problematic aspects to the Constitution. Top of those being, as you mentioned, that in contrast, for instance, to the U.S. Constitution, or I'm not super familiar with the Canadian Charter, but I believe it's similar. And I'll take your word on that. That the fundamental rights in the Indian Constitution basically are completely conditional, and have written into it that they so many exceptions to them that they basically don't exist as a protective fallback for guaranteeing the democratic human rights of Indian citizens.
No, sorry to interrupt you, but to give people, like, I always take this opportunity to tell them they should go after this and read Article 19, which is the right to freedom of speech, right to freedom. 4 lines saying you have this freedom, and then 400 lines which take away that right from you, which basically says the government can, under good morality, good order, can basically take it away from you. So basically, that article does not give rights to people. It basically gives rights to the government to take away any fundamental right that you might have as a human being. So it's kind of a very sinister joke. Sorry, Peter, I interrupted you. But
yeah, so I would say two things about that on Article 19. That contrasts so dramatically. First thing, so dramatically with the First Amendment to the U.S. Constitution, which is a handful of lines and which has no exceptions built into it. Now, in the process of people being arrested and cases going through courts and up to the Supreme Court, we have worked through setting judicial precedents to build certain parameters around what exactly does constitute freedom of speech or religion, etc., in this country. But at the core foundation, at the beginning, there are basically zero exceptions to it. And the other thing that I would note on the Indian Constitution, and this has been the same problem with laws like AFSPA, the sedition law in India, et cetera, is that much of it seems to be, if I'm not gonna throw shade at the moment on Congress, but I will throw shade on the British colonizers and whoever it was, thought afterwards it would be a good idea to take the laws which the British colonizers drafted in order to govern India as a colonial subject. And all of these laws were designed to.
Yeah, we can't hear you, Peter. I think you got a phone call or something.
And then once India got independence, bizarrely, a huge number of these laws, like the AFSPA, for instance, that one's been heavily documented, and the sedition law, that one's been heavily documented, were basically copied and pasted from the British colonial laws, which were being applied to.
I'm gonna okay. Peter, you still there?
Yes, I'm here.
Okay, I'm going to just kind of rebut you and kind of interrupt you. I think because I have done a study of British colonial laws and compared them against UAPA, TADA, and NSA. They are British colonial, the worst of British colonial laws were the Revolt Act. They don't even come close to where today we are in terms of UAPA. The laws were not copied. They were actually made more draconian. So that is where the problem is. The British were like creating a colony. So if you read the so-called, there was actually no freedom movement in India. There was no insurgency movement when British were there for 47 years. In reality, all the insurgency in India started after British left because the laws became more draconian. So if you compare we read in history books, that Revolt Act, First World War, Britishers implemented a law for 4 years, which created this agitation. You know what that law was? If you go and read it, it was that a police officer can search any premises without warrant and can break into anybody's house and put somebody under preventive detention. And it was only for temporary 4 years period, and it was taken away. And it was still today is the cheapest law. People don't read what is the law today in India. The NSA in India today, and just for the guidance, some people, because they don't know, you can be picked up in UAPA, kept under custody for 2 years, which can be even extended up to 3 years, without letting you know what are the charges against you. And if the police officer thinks that you are a terrorist and you are involved in some crime, you have to prove your innocence. The burden of proof is on the person who is charged, and not on the state to prove that this guy is so, like, you see, like, this kind of a law was not even in the colonial time. So that's why I don't blame everything on Britishers. I think there's something very wrong in the mindset of the casteist elite which took power when the British left, whether it is in BJP or Congress, because they don't understand fundamentally the concept of individual liberty. Sorry, I kind of interrupted you. Go ahead, Peter, and
Sure,
finish.
no problem. Well, I mean, that's steering a little bit away from the topic du jour, but a lot of that I agree with. Not everything I agree with. Certainly, that has one of the underlying issues that we could delve into, as far as how India has this still, since its origins as an independent nation and before, and still enduring today, this endemic problem with caste, which is another angle of the oppression which is ongoing in the country there.
Yeah, one thing before I take next question, Peter, like a gentleman here is pinging that your books are not available in Amazon India. Is that true? Like, what's going on there?
Yeah, that's true. My books are print on demand, and they do not offer print on demand in India. They are available, however, on pothi.com to order in India.
Okay, POTHI.com. So hopefully, listeners who are listening, I'll probably send a tweet as well. We need to tell people in India. It is very important. Anybody who's born in the subcontinent, in my view, whether in India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, to read some of the work Peter has done, especially his book on Gandhi, and also on the latest book that has come out on how the Hindu to nationalist movement is penetrating US. With that said, I will take Joe's question, and then there's an online question which came, and then we'll go to Rafi. Joe, thank you for being so patient. Please go ahead.
Yes, thank you so much for taking my question. I'm with DFW Anti-War Committee. We're a grassroots organization opposed to U.S. imperialism, and our focus currently is certainly very strongly on Palestine, though there is an awareness of like Hindutva nationalism within like the organizing community, certainly in DFW. I wanted to briefly draw a parallel just between something that happened in Israeli history and then ask a question where in India, under the Hindutva fascist influence, and in Israel, there's been this like flattening of who is acceptable in a society, and like in Israel in particular, it's not just like all Jewish people are welcome in Israel either, and you see that in the example of like diaspora languages of the Jewish people being banned at various points in Israel. So things like Yiddish and Ladino not being acceptable to speak in order to create this very narrow identity that could serve the Zionist project. So to my question, I'm not as familiar as I would like to be about the relationship between Israel and the current regime in India. I know that Israel has a long history of allying itself with various apartheid regimes in Rhodesia and apartheid South Africa, but my impression is that the relationship with India is a little more complicated, despite having a lot of parallels and similar goals. And so I was curious if you could just speak briefly to the nature of their relationship.
Yeah, that's a wonderful question, and it's a very timely. This aspect of the interrelationship or intersections between Hindutva and Zionism has, over the past 6 months especially, begun to emerge very, very frequently. For instance, I mentioned earlier, last week I was in New York City. I was attending a event which was co-sponsored by Jewish Currents magazine and Middle East Eye, which was about the India-Israel relationship, and especially covering the Hindutva Zionist relationship. One of the speakers there was Azad Essa, Azadessa. And if you're interested in really getting birds, or well, I guess a 101 on this issue and the history behind it, I recommend his book. He's a journalist from Middle East Eye, and I believe last year he published this book called Hostile Homelands, about the Israel-India alliance. And he goes in deep into the history, as well as the relationship between the ideologies, but also the histories between the two countries. Briefly, one of the aspects, I can't get into all of it, and I'm new to this. I've just begun writing about it. I had a piece about it out on Mondoweiss a couple of weeks ago, about how AIPAC and a lot of the Zionist lobby in America are heavily funding some of the same people that are being heavily funded by the Hindutva lobby, and about overlap between not just their financing, but also their policy agendas. Azad, for instance, he does get into some of this interesting history about how historically, tracing back to 1947, India as a government did in many ways have this kind of overt performative support for Palestine and the Palestinian cause. but they only did it in as much as it served India's own interests. And if you pull back the curtain, under the radar, India from the 60s onwards was engaging in covert arms deals with Israel multiple times, with even intelligence cooperation with Israel in the 70s and 80s, including with Indian commandos going to Israel, getting trained by Israel, and then returning and participating in this June 1984 invasion of the Sikh Golden Temple in Punjab, which was basically like the first act of the 1984 Sikh genocide. A lot of other things that one could go into about that, certainly in the modern day. But it's an issue that demands exploration, and it's also an issue. Last thing I'll say, as a specialist on this issue, my constant struggle is to try and get Americans to care and to understand why they should care. And a lot of Americans, especially since October of last year, care about, they already knew about, and now increasingly intensely care about the Zionist issue. And when it comes to trying to get them to care about the Hindutva issue, educating them about this overlap and this increasingly intimate alliance between these two supremacist ideologies, I think that that's a real golden opportunity for, I mean, one, getting people to care about what's happening in India, but also two, a collaborative effort.
Got it. Thank you, Peter. This is great. Unless Joe has another follow up, there is Rafi. Before coming to you, there is a gentleman online who had asked a question on the live stream. His question, Peter, is how are you comparing HSS with RSS? Because RSS is giving arms training in their saga meetings. I don't know which meeting these are. And then his question is, how is HSS functioning in USA?
Sure. HSS is functioning in the USA basically as a platform to brainwash or propagandize its own community, to from there go out and operate from America as operating as individuals, not as an organization, but as individuals who are all members and leaders of that organization, to support the regime in India, both by doing stuff like going back there and helping get it elected, or here in America, propagandizing on its behalf and whitewashing it within society. Three, spreading the RSS view of Hinduism, which is a homogenized, a centralized, and ahistorical view as the sole legitimate view of Hinduism and of India, and to spread that throughout American society, in schools, in state capitals, in school curriculum, etc. And then four, again, not as an organization, but as leaders and members of who are from that organization, to prop up politicians in America who will be sympathetic to the Hindu nationalist movement, either by serving as roadblocks to make sure the U.S. turns a blind eye to what's happening in India, or serve more actively, proactively, as cheerleaders for Modi and for his regime over there. And the relationship, certainly the HSS in America doesn't do arms training as the RSS does in India, although they do assemblies in which sometimes they are actually using the go-to weapon of the RSS, the Lati, which is like this very long baton, like the equivalent of a baton that a police officer would carry here in the U.S., basically, except 3-4 times longer. And they're doing assemblies where they're in HSS uniform, just as RSS dresses in their uniform. They're engaged in military parade details, and they're practicing with this Lati weapon and things like that, which are very on the surface visually identical to what the RSS is doing in India. But in America, they more serve as a way to promote soft power of Hindutva abroad. Then as far as last thing, as far as how they're connected, there is absolutely no connection, or there is absolutely no dispute that they are connected to the RSS. They were founded around the world by RSS members who migrated out of India. The RSS leadership in India, for instance, here in the US, comes to the US and goes on tours of HSS units around America. The HSS leaders in America have, in the past, they go back to training camps in India, which are led by the RSS. They host events in America which feature RSS leadership from India, and so on and so on and so forth. And the HSS, various HSS leadership themselves here in the US, pretty open and explicit about the fact that they are inspired by the RSS or that they spring from the RSS and serve as the RSS abroad.
Got it. We'll take a question from Rafi. Then I want to, Peter, play a small video. Okay, it's a 2-minute video to just kind of highlight how much this Indian nationalism, or Peter doesn't like to call it Indian nationalism, Hindu nationalism, has infiltrated into the minds of the Indian diaspora, who are actually holding today even US passports, but they're basically kind of have started hating the US flag and our system, and kind of are subconsciously or sometimes consciously batting for the Indian regime, and Indian regime type kind of taking control of our society here. So I'm going to play a small kind of insightful video of an interview of an Indian nationalist who's actually a US citizen. But before we do that, we'll take one question from Rafi. Rafi, go ahead.
I'm not hearing anything.
The ruling class, you could name them upper caste, they are always ruling. In the time of Muslims rulers and at the time of the Britishers, they were the ruling class. And after leaving British, they came to the power, and they are having the power. People should understand the higher caste, the ruling class, is always remain ruling till 75 years. They are on the they are the ruling class, and they are ruling to India. What's happened in 1876? They coined the Hinduism, and they made the higher caste. They were in the they were in the minority. By making Hinduism, they became majority, and by forgetting the India, they can say that they divided the power of lower caste Hindus and Muslims. This is the strategy they made it to capture the power. By encouraging hatred against Muslims and Pakistan, unless they want to unite the Hindu World Bank and to rule it. Why? Because 1876, there is a labor movement started in the Britain, and Britain was talking about labor class power. And they want to introduce the same laws, like a Minto-Marlowe Commission. They want to introduce the same laws in India. They want to give the power to the lower caste Hindus. The lower caste Hindus that time was defined as a OBC, BC, SC, ST, and Dalit. They were called depressed classes. There was no Hinduism. They were called depressed classes. And they are called the Achut. Achut means untouchable. And they were out of the 4 varnas of the Hinduism, Sanatanism. Sanatan was the religion that time for the higher caste. But they created the Hinduism there to add these people. For that the reason, like Bhai Parmanand, Bankim Chatterjee, and many of the people like Lala Lajpat Rai, they all sit together and they decided for that. And for that, the reason Bhai Parmanand went to the South Africa to ask Gandhi to come to the India.
Yeah. Pari, I'm gonna. No, this is all great. I think this is your observation is spot on. I'll kind of push you to kind of put on the question. Yeah, yeah.
So let me see that after the partition and after the division of India, the upper higher caste are ruling India. Whether it is a power of Congress, whether it is a power of anybody, the ruling class is higher caste, and the RSS was the super duper organization. They were controlling all the things. It's still the same setup and still the same thing. All institutions, everything was under their control. So if the Congress came or any party come, there is no change unless there is a power sharing should not come. So there is a problem that now the Modi is saying openly that he is working out to make 1,000 years again. Means for whom he is saying for 1,000 years? Because he wanted to make it upper caste to rule India for 1,000 years. For that the reason he is doing all these things. Rather than he want to crush Muslims, they will discard Muslims and want to economically make slaves to the lower caste and rule India forever. This is the plan. We should understand all these things happening. And about in USA, 1967 there's a VSP started in USA, but there was no take up. But at the time of the Babri Masjid, 1992, it started there. The Hindus joining to this movement of Babri Masjid, because there is a lobbying of the Gujarat party, Gujarat state was having there. And there is a APCO PR agency, which PR agency supported to the Modi in Gujarat, and they brought the Modi to the power. And all this happened like 2002 or Bombay. Everybody alleged that this APCO PR agency is responsible for that. I don't know what is the truth is it, but they alleged. But what's happened from that time? There is a lobbying in USA. There is against all these people, about senators and celebrities, everybody. There is a lobbying. There's a money spending on that to lobby against the Pakistan. Then they went to the other religious organization like Jews. They went to the Jews, Daniel Phillips and other people. So they joined there and they started campaigning against Muslim, against Islam, and against Pakistan. From there, the hate campaign started. This hate campaign,
yeah. Pari, I'm gonna just interrupt you. I think that's great. I think your observations are spot on. I think you made a number of observations. One is about that in reality, and I'm going to just paraphrase that for them, so that I let Peter kind of comment on it. That in reality, what is happening is that the so-called religion is only a layer that people are using. In reality, it is the elite castes of India who are using Hinduism or the mask of Hinduism or RSS, whatever it is, to actually keep control of the resources of the country and keep the OBCs and other castes suppressed. And it is the same philosophy which has now come to USA. I think that was the larger point. But if there, Peter, if you want to comment on that or anything else that you observed in the gentleman's remarks.
Yeah, well, I'll just say that I appreciate the gentleman's observations, and as you said, I believe he was conveying that there's basically this facade of religion which is being used, especially by Hindu nationalists, to control. And I think case in point with that would be tracing back to 1923, when the original book Hindutva was written as the very first fully articulated manifesto about the religious nationalist political ideology of Hindu nationalism. And that was written by V.D. Savarkar, who was an avowed atheist, who had no interest in religion other than using it as to steal the words of Marx, wasn't it? So Marx, who called religion the opium of the masses. And I think that very cynically that the internationalist movement views religion as the opium of the masses and wants to use and abuse use it that way and use it to abuse the citizenry with it that way.
Yeah, no, that's great. I think this link of the caste is very important, because and before I go there, Peter, I see you have dropped from the space. Not sure how much time you have, but if you are able to relog back into space, that's fine.
Yeah, I've got maybe 15 minutes left.
Got it, got it, got it. And yeah, so this link with caste is like whenever, Peter, there is, recently there was, a bill that came out in California for, having a bill which can specifically recognize caste based discrimination in workplace. We see that many of these Hindu American Foundation and other, RSS inspired organizations within, of diaspora came out very violently against it. In Seattle, there was a bill being passed, against discrimination in workplace. Again, they just kind of joined hand and came out against it. Why are they so against any, like, why should anybody have a problem with like a bill which is, trying to stop discrimination? Why do these agencies are so, these Indian American so-called foundations, so touchy on the question of, hey, don't even talk about caste. There is no caste discrimination. And, if you talk about caste discrimination, then you are basically being Hindu phobic. Why do you think they're so touchy?
Well, that's a great question. I think it probably boils down to the fact that the RSS is a Brahmin upper caste originated organization. It has always had a Brahmin top caste as its leadership. And then correspondingly here in the U.S., most of the Hindu nationalist organizations which link back to the RSS, most of them here in the U.S. are dominated by upper caste leadership and membership as well. And considering that caste discrimination trickles from the top down, that caste discrimination occurs by upper castes against so-called lower castes, I think it's pretty easy to figure out why there would be a fear among Hindu nationalists in America about caste discrimination being banned.
And I would just want to point out, when this bill was being opposed in California and also in Seattle, the Sikh organizations, the local Gurdwara committees, they came out in full support. And I was proud to see, many of the, our elderly kind of there trying to give, support in whatever little English they know. I don't know whether I saw any Muslim organizations out in support there. If they are good, if they're not, then they should, look.
Well, I can speak to that as far as I don't know. I wasn't at any of the on the ground activities, but in terms of activities, online activities in terms of lobbying, etc. I'm aware of a large number of Muslims that were involved in supporting the bills and that were speaking out against caste discrimination and supportive of banning it in the U.S. And then as far as Sikhs turning out, yes, I mean, I agree you should be proud of that. And it should also be kind of a no-brainer and to be expected, considering that opposition to caste and the attempt to create a casteless society was so fundamental and foundational to Sikhism from its very origins.
Yeah, but we need to do more, I think, in aligning, and I think you pointed out. Yeah, no. Okay. Rafi Sabadi, yeah, go ahead.
Due to this phobia and hatred, the Western values, Western morality is degraded. And also I found that, the values is degraded from your Western societies. And also the Western society corrupted. Because when I'm watching the media, social media, I found the Western society is corrupted. and due to this, hatred, due to these phobias. What do you say, Peter?
I'm not sure I have a really formed opinion on that at the moment, brother.
Yeah, I kind of paraphrase that question a bit. I think what he's trying to say is, uh, Peter, like, what is happening is what we are seeing is, and do you see that as well? At least I have observed that one of the tactics that many of these Hindu nationalists are using is to kind of deepen the divide that is there today between American society. In America we are deeply divided between left and right. Now, fundamentally, I don't think the positions are very far off from each other. We can have a dialogue, but our media and politicians keep deepening the divide. But now we have Hindu nationalists who probably see this as an opportunity to curry favors on both sides. So I see them, many of them joining, there's a conservative spaces, which I generally am in a conservative and libertarian space because that's where that's my safe space. But they will come in and they will try to fan this xenophobia, and kind of try to, incite this backlash against immigrants. And then I see the same Hindu nationalists or Indian nationalists kind of trying to, do the same thing in the liberal spaces. Do you think that there's an attempt there, like a malicious attempt to kind of profit from this division that we have within America?
Yes, I do agree with what you're seeing, that is certainly happening. As far as the motivation behind it, I don't know if it's a malicious motivation, which is intentional to fan the flames of division, although certainly whether it's intended or not, that would end up being one of the actual outcomes. But what I do believe I can speak to as far as a motivation is it's a motivation to hedge their bets and to play all sides and to curry favor wherever they can find it. And so we are seeing, yes, we're certainly seeing that, and increasing in the past couple of years. We have far right, MAGA, anti-immigrant, Hindu nationalist, sympathizing politicians running on Republican Party labels. At the same time, and Vivek Ramaswamy would be one example that I would offer, although he's not the most extreme. There are other more extreme examples at lower levels of candidates for lower level offices. But on the left, we also have people like Raja Krishnamurti, who is fully seems to be fully in the pocket of the Hindu nationalist movement, and who's purporting to be a left progressive. And tracing back to when I was talking about Tulsi Gabbard being propped up right before Modi was elected, and how right before the same people, the same individuals from these internationalist organizations, right before they started propping her up, just about 1 year before, they were propping up a far-right Tea Party Republican, and trying to get him trying to use him to whitewash Modi. When that didn't work out, they shifted their attention over to Tulsi Gabbard, who at the time was a progressive Democrat, although now she's gone a different direction. But for me, from then to now, it's really, if nothing else, at minimum, it's an example of how there's this willingness, kind of this cynical willingness to seek to infiltrate and involve in any movement, no matter what it be, so as to gain a place at the table and try and get a foot in the doors of power.
Related to that, Peter, like, do you think it is being done in a very sophisticated way? Because, I joined these Twitter spaces, and what's your take on, like, where I've listened to some of these conversations where people are kind of, there's this group of people who are apparently, obviously, very sympathetic to the Hindu nationalist cause, and they regularly conduct these spaces. And they were planning, on this, they just had this space, they were trying to plan, hey, we have this Shri, so and so guru coming from India to US. So they were trying to, arrange the logistics about it, and, who will take care of, his visit, and, the PR and all that stuff. And then in between, they were discussing, how we have to make sure that it does not get linked to RSS. Now, all these are RSS members in US, but they were basically trying to say, if we are called out that we are from RSS, how are we going to deny and keep a distance and have that plausible deniability that, we are not RSS, it is just a guru who is coming from India trying to, this kind of benign, universal teaching for Americans. But in reality, all of them were RSS members. That guru was totally in league with RSS, but they have this very sophisticated way of kind of, keeping distance from each other, so that in case they are called out for being this fascist organization, they can quickly deny, no, we are just doing yoga, or we are just doing, spiritual teaching. Do you think like we are being played here?
Well, that's a great question. And the short answer is that it's in many ways very difficult to say for sure, because whether it's this sophisticated, calculated campaign or not, what we do know is that most of this is all clandestine. It's behind closed doors. It's the sort of stuff that has to be dug up. And when it comes to, and I think we've talked about this before, when it comes, for instance, to identifying politicians who have links to these Hindu nationalist sympathizers, one of the easiest ways to go about it is by looking at their campaign finance records, which are legally required to be made public. That's something that these groups can't avoid having made public. So we have access to them. When it comes to whatever plans they may or may not be making as far as how to go about this, that's pure speculation. What we do know from India, however, one thing is that the BJP in India, for instance, has run these sophisticated, heavily funded BJP IT cells for years, in which they have thousands and thousands of people who are employed to basically operate as interference on behalf of the BJP on social media, and go in a mob after anybody that's critical of the BJP, or go in a mob to support anybody that's a supporter of the BJP. And we know that level of sophistication is operating there. We know that there's a level of sophistication here in the U.S. where across several of these different Hindu nationalist entities, organizations in America, the top leaders of them, several people in particular, coordinated to organize probably a 2-year campaign from America to support getting Modi in India. And I've talked about various ways in which they did that, the tactics they used as far as phone banks traveling to India, etc. But what we do know is that was an intensive 2-year campaign. We also know that when that campaign to support the BJP's elect campaign attempt in India was launched, from here in America, the BJP was sending over from India BJP officials to coordinate with leadership and train BJP sympathizers in America. We have examples of that. We have examples. A lot of the stuff that you've talked about, where the anti-caste or anti-caste bills or bills banning caste discrimination were opposed. Those, or where we have curriculum campaigns being run to try and change school curriculums, or other examples I could probably think up, and that I could think up, where the same players are behind all of these, even though they're all around the country in different states. It's the same tactics being used. One other example I would point to was a few years ago when a few dozen universities organized an online webinar, a 2-day webinar, called Dismantling Global Hindutva. And in response to it, the Hindu nationalists in the US came out in outcry against it and organized an email campaign against it, which resulted in a flood of a million plus emails to these universities, most of which, as I recall, the research and data eventually showed, most of which originated from within India. So I would argue that we don't have hard data on it, and it's going to be difficult to obtain hard data on it. Although with deep research and more than one person working on it, we can begin to crack the egg open. But there is a lot of reason to speculate with pretty good certainty that many of these campaigns at various levels, social or political or what have you, are being run in a pretty coordinated manner, in a pretty sophisticated manner, yes, and in many occasions with and in some occasions with actual provable involvement, but in many occasions most likely with direct involvement from somebody back in India, whether it's the BJP political apparatus or with the BJP having been in control of the Indian government, maybe even the aspects of the Indian government.
No, that's awesome. That's awesome.
Yeah, and last thing I would say about that is from my own personal experience is that speaking as an American citizen born in America who's become known as a vocal critic of Hindutva and the Modi regime, that I do know that as far as the level of sophistication with the pushback here is that RAW, India's intelligence agency, has apparently gone after me, with Washington Post reporting last year that their investigation had concluded that RAW was running a disinformation campaign against critics of Hindutva and the Modi regime, including myself. So, I mean, that's a fairly high level of sophistication.
Just for FII, the depths they can drop to. I am a third generation veteran, okay, from Indian Armed Forces. And just because I criticize Indian government, they flagged my picture on the national TV News X and said, "Hey, this is a terrorist in US who is criticizing India," and they banned my Twitter account. So that's the level of that the Indian regime today is kind of willing to go to, and the dirty tricks that they use to scare off people from criticizing anything about Indian government. But Peter, first of all, I want you to now kind of I'll take you it's towards conclusion. Not sure how much time you have.
Yeah. Give me 3-5 minutes or two.
Got it. So I will like to before you go, I will like you to, as conclusion, I'd like you to watch a clip. I want to see your, reaction as a person who was born in America. I am naturalized, so I am familiar with this stuff. But you are born here as a born patriot. When you see this kind of a take, and I'm going to play you a clip of a vice president of Oracle. He holds an American passport today, but he's obviously a Hindu nationalist or an Indian nationalist, and he's a very prominent social media account. And he does all these spaces influencing the Indian diaspora in US, and kind of incites them constantly against how bad US is, and how good Indian civilization is. I want to see, how do you feel? I feel like I am horrified, and I start seeing it as a national security threat. But I want to know, how does a normal American feel when they see this? I don't know how much Hindi do you know. It's the video is going to play. It has subtitles, so you will be able to kind of read it. But you might have to just go bigger on your screen. But on the screen, you can see me, right? On your phone screen or
Yeah.
laptop screen?
Yeah,
Okay.
go ahead.
Got it. So I'm going to share my screen and play that. And if you are not able to hear, just interrupt. And I'm going to share my screen here. It's a very interesting video. And this gentleman then obviously blocked me immediately.
And West को तो आपको मालूम ही है कि they can't even manufacture shells. ये लोग जितना भी West का जो propaganda है, that is only on paper. जब हम इनसे सामने लड़ने जाएंगे तो आपसे संधि कर लेंगे. The moment you begin to fight, आपसे संधि कर लेंगे. तो सुभाष चंद्र बोस लड़ने के लिए आए, दोस्ती कर लिया. आजादी दे दो, भाग जाते, डब्बों के सारे के सारे. They are only good in Hollywood movies. So the biggest contribution of American superpower status is Hollywood movies, and the reality on the ground is exactly opposite of Hollywood movies. America जहां भी गया फिट करा है. Now, coming to, so I've covered this, and I'm coming to the light. Or Indian aircraft carriers are British aircraft carrier तो समुद्र में भी नहीं निकल पाते with 2 towers. British aircraft carrier cannot even go to the ocean. Forget about fighting. And British are dead scared of Indians. Dead scared. British, the first thing when the Argentinian Falkland War was going on, British made a peace with India that India will not interfere. तो उनको जो भी बियर, जो अपने ब्रिटेन के लोग बियर पे बोले बियर, you just drink beer, just leave the country to us, we will come manage Britain now. बोलना चाहिए, निकल जाओ वहां से, निकल जाओ, we don't need you, go to some Greenland, you don't need to be on the British. British aircraft carrier में तेल नहीं है, मिसाइल नहीं है, तो बेटा तुम नाव की सैर करने निकले हो कि लड़ने निकले हो? It's a glorified nonsense on the planet. Okay. और भारत का INS विक्रांत, even though smaller in size, USS Midway के size का है, हमारे San Diego Museum में USS Midway, but it is the most formidable aircraft carrier. उससे now comes the biggest Indian weapon, is the Indian soldier, जाबाज. मतलब हमारी माएँ प्रोड्यूस करती है शेर, वो भी बबर शेर. हमारी माएँ कोई गीदड़ नहीं प्रोड्यूस करती है. जैसे अमेरिकन स्लोगन होता है पैक ऑफ वुल्व्स. वुल्व्स का क्या होता है? वुल्व्स जो है लाशें खा के घूमते हैं. When the lion is hunted, then wolves come to eat the kill. This is what the American foreign policy is. Pack of wolves. Everywhere when a lion is hunted, they go and eat the carcass. मरे हुए आदमी. हम लोग नहीं करते, हम वेजिटेरियन लोग. इसके बारे में बोलते भी नहीं थे. अब तुम खुल के बात करते हैं, बोलते हैं ठीक है निकाल दो हमारी सिटीजनशिप, आई डोंट केयर, है ना, कोई फर्क नहीं पड़ता है. राखी कृष्ण मारे के, मारे कृष्ण राखी के. तो इंडियन सोल्जर्स में अमेरिकन सील्स रिपोर्ट्स प्रोड्यूस करते हैं, सील्स आर द बेस्ट. सारे थुल मोटे आदमी कहां से बेस्ट हो गए? तुम्हारे पेट बाहर निकला हुआ है, कहां के सील हो गए? रशियन, है ना. अभी अमेरिकन सोल्जर तो यही पता लगेगा आई एम ए मैन और ए वुमन और ए ट्रांसजेंडर, ये भूल करेंगे. कहां लड़ने जाएगा? पता वॉर के बीच में क्या बोलता है? आई एम ए ट्रांसजेंडर, आई हैव टू रिस्पेक्ट. सर तुम लड़ने गए हो, क्या करने? छक्कागिरी क्यों दिखा रहे हो वहां पे? आदमी की तरह बात करो भाई. या तो बोलो मैं आदमी हूं या महिला हूं, फिर आप बात करो आगे जाके. वो कंफ्यूजन नहीं है हमारी सेनाओं में, क्यों करके आपको बता रहा हूँ. एंड आई एम नेचुरली एंथुसियास्टिक अबाउट इंडिया. तो लगेगा कि मैं इंडिया के बारे में ही बात करूंगा, क्योंकि आई एम नेचुरली एंथुसियास्टिक अबाउट. दुश्मन को कभी भी ग्लोरीफाई नहीं करना चाहिए, नंबर 1 रूल है, चाणक्य का रूल है, चाहे वो कैसा भी हो. अमेरिका चाहे कितना भी दुख बना ले, अमेरिका कभी भी, हम लोग ढूंढते हैं अमेरिका काश इंडिया को तारीफ कर ले. क्यों करेगा भाई? तुम दुश्मन है ना मेरा, क्यों करेगा? ये तो आपका गड़बड़ी, आपका मेंटल डिजीज है कि आप ग्लोरीफाई करते हो. मैं तो नहीं करता. What I have is the best, the greatest, the finest the world.
Okay, so I'm going to stop the screen share. Before you comment, just to give you background, Peter, this gentleman is the vice president of Oracle, okay, well, the vice president, and as I said, the prominent personality. How do you see his comments? And if I tell you that probably his views are shared by 80% of Indian diaspora in US, will that worry you?
Well, I would dispute that his views are shared by 80%. I know you. I appreciate the dialogue, but I personally wouldn't settle on anywhere near that high of a number. But certainly the fact that he is the VP of Oracle and the type of position that he's in, to have somebody like that, even if only 5% share that, but if they're in that sort of a position, that's concerning. You know, Harjeet, my main thought when I'm watching him is that I've heard that type of language before. I've heard that type of language before from British colonizers and from America, with this idea of the white man's burden. This language that we're the best, everybody else is inferior. Those people over there, they're savages. They're not as refined or as civilized as us, and therefore we should go and take them over. It's the language of colonizers. It's the language also of supremacy, and I can say I'm speaking as an American, and I love my country. I don't like using the term. I personally, I wouldn't say I'm proud of my country, but I love my country, and I cannot imagine, for one thing, speaking as an American about, especially in a country that especially going to another country and speaking as an American about how America's best. We do everything better than you guys do. And look, you guys are fat pigs, and we're not like that. We're not like you. We're superior. I mean, just the audacity and the arrogance to, for me to even consider that, especially going to another country. But I wouldn't even do that here in my own country. In fact, one of the things I love about my country, and one of the things that I think is so sad and pathetic, dangerous, but sad and pathetic about this kind of rhetoric, dangerous, but coming from somebody in his position, but pathetic, is that as an American who loves his country, I am more than happy to criticize my country, and I do it constantly. I criticize my country right now for its foreign policy on the Palestine issue. I've criticized my country for its involvement in wars in Iraq and Afghanistan and its overall foreign policy over decades. I criticize my country on all kinds of domestic policies. And as an American, one of the reasons I love my country is that being able to criticize it freely is something that's so deeply protected. And I would never want that to be taken away from me. And this kind of rhetoric coming from somebody like this, where he's in America apparently, and he's come to America and he's talking about India, but I'll get to last thing. But for him as somebody from India to have such a concept of his country of origin of India being free from criticism, that it should be free from criticism, it's just sad.
I'm gonna interrupt you, Peter. I think what has happened, is like I'm gonna help you. I'm gonna push you to take another viewpoint on this. Okay. Because we in US, and I have seen, I'm not in your shoes totally, but I can empathize with you. Like, we have this something called white man's burden. Whenever we see somebody using a racist colonizer language, we tend to take it on ourselves. And oh, this happens in my society. I see this guy talking, downgrading Mexicans and Indians all the time. And there is racism within US. Nobody can deny racism in every society. Nobody can deny that. The issue is not that. The issue is, Peter, you suppose you go to India and you take up a job in India and you take up citizenship of India and you get, paid, and you do that because you are getting a better living. India probably pays and takes care. You get more rights for your kids. Your kids are getting a better life. Your kids, and you don't want to move back to America, let us say. Let's say we play that scenario. And now you take the citizenship. Will you sitting there now say America is the best and America should destroy the Indian civilization? That is the dichotomy here.
Well, that's exactly my point, and that's where it gets to, as I said, this is dangerous.
This is not about racism. This is about what I call treasonous. Like, it's kind of, ingratitude that is in kind of, in a human being should be incapable of.
Certainly, yeah. It's ingratitude. It's dangerous, and it's ingratitude. That I mean, this man certainly came to America for a particular reason. Nobody forced him to come here. He's welcome to come here, but then when he comes here and responds by talking about, as he's apparently getting ahead, and he came here probably to get ahead, and he's talking about America in these terms. Yeah, it's disgraceful, and it should be infuriating to anybody that is an American.
But if you are, Peter, if I make you sit in the national security chair, right? Should you not be worried? Like, should we not, like, we have racism, like, no doubts about it. We have to solve it. Okay. But what if now today, let us say there are 1 million such people. Let's say, I'm just quoting a number and we can dispute the number. Let's say there are 1 million. We might say it's not more than 100,000. That's fine. 1 million such people who are sitting in places of prominence, in power, in academia, in politics, in businesses, in media who are actively doing the bidding of a foreign third world country, and who from inside hate this very system while they hold the passport of it. Okay, I think Peter got disconnected. We'll see if he joins back. So that's where I was trying to push Peter. Like, Peter, you still, I see on you on the listener on the space. Let me call you on the space. Okay, he's back. Yeah. Yeah. Peter, can you hear me now?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Yeah. So if you are in the national security, take it, if you look at it from a national security angle, like, and I'm looking at it not from like a narrow angle. Like today, like I am a Sikh American. I will always be a Sikh American. Maybe my son will be a total 100% like just American, but so I am not kind of I'm aware about that my background kind of goes with me when I'm an American, but I still get equal rights. Like, will it not worry me? It is worrying me that if there are a million such people within my system, irrespective of all our defects, who want us to be like a third world country, is that, should I not look at it like a national security threat?
Well, I mean, at the outset, Harjeet, like one thing is I know you use this term, but I don't prefer the term third world country. But in terms of this, I mean, I would look at this person if I were in a national security position and say, yeah, this guy should be perhaps flagged as, yeah, he's not threatening anything in particular, but he's certainly espousing extremist supremacist rhetoric, which is anti-American. Now, does he have a right to do that? Yeah, he has a right to do that.
Yeah. No, I'm not talking about his right. He has full rights.
But
I'm
I would certainly pay attention to it.
Yeah. So that is my worry, like what happens, like, like I'm not talking about this individual, I feel bad I have to play his video. Like, there's nothing against this individual. He has full rights as an American to, criticize.
And what I feel like you're getting at, and what I would agree with is, I mean, you've played his video. I've seen there's a large number of other similar videos that you could find of people probably in America who are espousing, somewhat related or similar views, which are along the lines of this guy. And so there's certainly a problem as far as a trend of this being rhetoric that is present to a large extent, coming out of various circles from people who clearly are supremacist minded, who are not actually, as far as we know, directly involved with the Hindu nationalist movement or with the Hindu nationalist entities. And that is something, that is another aspect of this, which is, very concerning and needs to be, I mean, my first concern in dealing with this, not being in a national security position, but as a journalist, would be to gather this guy and then take together as many other examples of other people in high positions saying similar stuff as I can, to put out an article exposing how there's top tech or top corporate leaders in America from India who are putting out basically anti-American Indian supremacist rhetoric.
Yeah.
Yeah, that would be my first go-to with the position that I am in.
No, I would say that, like, and I think we briefly discussed it once, that the most effective way would be like when you fill up form DS 160. If you have to come to US, anybody, you have to fill up form DS 160. In the end, there are certain things you have to check, that I certify that I don't hold any, I have not participated in any, genocide, or, or been part of, an organization which is a terrorist organization, or hold, Nazi fascist kind of views. I think I would bet for first time, I am a libertarian, but this is one place where I would bet that our government should really do in that process. When you give visas, there should be a check on, the social profile of that person, and kind of a and his social media views and all, and we have to check, does does that person has views which are inimical to our Bill of Rights. If that person has views which are so ingrained in him or her that they will never be able to reconcile them with the Bill of Rights, then why are we allowing such a person into US? Because we are here because we all adhere to the Bill of Rights and to the Constitution, and it is the parent that we have let in our system now millions of people who will never ever agree or give their true allegiance to Bill of Rights while they will end up holding our American passport. I think that is the fundamental problem.
Well, that as a solution, I'm not here to offer solutions, but I am here to document, research, and expose. And certainly, thank you for bringing this video to my attention. I wasn't aware of it, especially of this guy being an Oracle VP. And like I said, I mean, from where I'm at, my first step on my own as an individual would be to take this video and work on putting together a narrative to prove that he's not the only guy doing and saying stuff like this.
No, absolutely. Thank you for that suggestion. And Peter, like there are no further questions, but I'll give you a couple of minutes if you want to, wrap up and any message you want to give to generally my listeners. There are some regular listeners. Many of them are from diaspora. Many of them could be just born here. Any message you want to give, and then also share what are your plans this year? Any other book coming?
Sure. Well, I would just want to say thank you, Harjeet. It's always a pleasure to dialogue with you. And that's one of the things that I really value is this free and open dialogue. You and I don't disagree on so much, but I love, especially as you mentioned, the polarization of America. I love when people who disagree on a little or even a lot can sit down and just chat. And I think that that's one of the major, speaking of solutions, I think that's one of the major solutions to the polarization of America is to have more and more of that. I would encourage anybody who's listening who's not from the diaspora to just continue learning about this issue. It is an open secret in America, particularly, open secret in particular context of Hindu nationalist presence and involvement and interference in American sociopolitics, but it's very less known by people outside the diaspora, and they're in particular the ones who need to know about it in order to affect change. On that front, please buy my book. It's available on Amazon in most country stores. Harjeet, you're here in the U.S., so I don't know how many of your listeners are aware, but that's probably the best place to go get it is Amazon.com if you are in the U.S. And this to you, Harjeet, even directly, please leave a review, at least 1 star. But
no, definitely, yeah, I'll leave you a detailed review. Yeah.
Yes, I would appreciate that. That helps with the metrics and getting in front of more people. Lastly, I don't know if I have a lastly, but my plans for this year. Well, my plans are in process at the moment. I have a few articles coming out. One of my major plans is working on getting some good quality articles placed in some Western media outlets. I got an article in Mondoweiss last 2 weeks ago, and I hopefully have another one coming out soon. And I have a couple more lined up for some good quality outlets. I don't have another book forthcoming at the moment, but I do have a lot of plans for speaking as a Christian, for working with the Indian Christian diaspora, for really intense and systematic outreach to American churches around the country to educate them about what's happening to Christians in India. And as always, as I always do whenever I talk about what's happening in India, in this case, focus in educating American Christians about what's happening to Indian Christians first, but then also about what's happening to Indian Muslims and Sikhs and Dalits and others. But outreach to American Christians on that issue is top of my list. And then number of other articles that I'm working through. I've got speaking engagement at the end of this month in New York. I'll be speaking about what's happening. I'll be speaking at actually an event hosted by Indian Christians in honor of Indian Christian Day. I just spoke at the on U.S. Capitol Hill, I believe about 10 days ago on June 6th, at an event commemorating the 40th anniversary of the outset of the Sikh genocide. And I have a number of other speaking engagements in the works.
Yeah, thank you for that on that, that commemoration of the genocide, the Sikh genocide. And I saw that video and, that you spoke, and you've been a relentless champion of the cause. And I think you have done more for the Sikh cause than some of the many Sikh organizations, in my view, within US. And people tend to sometimes underappreciate that, and they get hung up on, why does Peter not say Khalistan Jindabad? And I tell them, that is not like, we have to become more sophisticated than that. But anyways, having said that, Peter, my kind of, I am convinced, that Indian nationalism, I know you don't call it Indian nationalism, you call it Hindu nationalism, but I think is the gravest national security threat to US today, especially in this, world where the global world order, which we have had for last 75 years, is being challenged by these authoritarian regimes. So to me, it is very, like, the work that you have done is critical to educate, which I feel, the fellow patriots on this emerging danger, or an emergent danger, or the emerged danger, I would say. And my job, as a patriot, is to kind of highlight, when you smell a rat, not walk away. My job is to, as a patriot, is to highlight this danger, which I feel, is imminent. And that is one. And the other cause, as I'm deeply, being a Sikh, being born in Punjab, I am, and also being concerned about subcontinent. Sometimes yours and my solutions are slightly different, but I am convinced that the solution to the subcontinent is, decolonization of the subcontinent, putting subcontinent back into its native nations. And, the start probably will be Punjab, but we'll see. I think our dialogue will continue. The thing where I need which I think you and I I would love to partner with you, is how can we start some spaces? There's so much divide within US, and this, how can I do anything, whatever limited thing I can do to, start a dialogue between the left and the right, because nobody is willing to, kind of let our society talk to each other. And everybody, it seems, from politicians to media to these foreign governments, are interested in deepening this divide. So I have not done much on that, but I'll probably think about it. I'll start, whatever little I can write about it, and I'll probably seek your help in some spaces on that front.
Well, yeah, as a last thing, Harjeet, I would say that is a admirable, worthy goal, which is the need of the hour. And from everything that I know about you, I mean, in practically every way, as an immigrant, as somebody from a non-majority religion in the U.S., as a libertarian, meaning that you're not adhering to either one of the polarized left or right camps necessarily, and it probably in many other ways. I can think of a few people with so many aspects of their identity who might be better poised to help to facilitate such dialogues.
Yeah, I think that puts a responsibility on my shoulders. I am kind of, but thank you, Peter. Thank you for your time, and, appreciate it. And we'll probably talk again sometime whenever you have, time again on your calendar. We'll figure something out.
Thank you, brother. Always a pleasure. You take care.
Thank you, Peter. We're going to end the live stream, and we'll continue on the space for a bit before